Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. Please let me know in the live chat how the sound is. Should be pretty good. I did a lot of work to it over the past couple weeks. So we are doing a stream on Thursday tonight because I think it's Thursday. Because I was traveling for Passover, so I apologize for the switch up, but I am committed to still doing a stream. I think it'll be a good one. We're going to talk about the simulation hypothesis. This is something we've talked about many times on here, but we haven't gotten into a video that was very specific for quite some time. So please hit the like button, comment down below. It really helps fuel the algorithm. And if you would like to join live chat, there is a live chat. What's up, Jan God? I appreciate the compliment. So we're going to talk about the simulation hypothesis. And it's an idea that is definitely growing. And I would say that is mostly been popularized by Elon Musk, and it was a very integral and formative idea for me to start considering at the very beginning of the journey that has led me here. It was long before I had any project called Sentient Singularity Theory. It was long before I was a theist, but it is almost it is very responsible, I guess. I don't know if responsible is the right word, but it's very integral to my my theophany, I guess, to my going from an anti-theist, self-described atheist to a theist. And this was not a movement that happened to me because of theological tradition or study or scripture. It was a movement that initially happened because of a philosophical idea that is called the simulation hypothesis that I heard from Elon Musk. And so we're going to talk about it because it's talked about a lot in terms of how it relates to the concept of probability, but it also has extremely relevant I guess, implications for the metaphysics and physics of our world and morality of our world and sociology of our world and biology of our world and technology of our world. Everything about our understanding of our reality is very relevant to this idea, even though I think that it is a mischaracterization of what, or misdescription. I don't even know if that's a word, but maybe somebody let me know in the chat if it is or not. But it's not the best description of what is actually going on. And we're going to talk about it because it's not a matter of probability. It is a matter of, I guess, logical inevitability. It's a better way of describing it. So here, grab some water. But like I said, please hit the like button. Please comment any questions you have below. Please share this if you find it meaningful. But we're also going to talk about a stream a little bit and reference it. I don't know how much yet, that Curt Jaimungal posted of a discussion between Scott Aaronson, David Chalmers, and the audience at MindFest 2024 called A Simulated Universe. It is linked below. I highly suggest watching it, even if we don't talk about it, but we probably will a little bit, because there's a lot of good points that are brought up, and it's a good video to take a look at. So first, let's look it up. Simulation definition, not even simulation hypothesis. First, just simulation definition. An imitation of a situation or process, so not the actual process that is being, I guess, imitated. It's like a model, but it's not the actual process. So that is something that's important to realize about the definition of the term simulation, because it's very important to what we're going to talk about. So the production of a computer model of something, especially for the purpose of studying. So simulation hypothesis. Simulation hypothesis proposed that what humans experience as the world is actually a simulated reality. Terrible term. Terrible term. Such as a computer simulation in which humans themselves are constructs. So basically, we are sentient Sims. In the Sims games. There has been much debate over the topic, ranging from philosophical discourse to practical applications in computing. Okay, so the reason why I first looked at the definitions of these things is because, as I've stated before many times, context is information, and language is about the formation of context. Very interesting kind of side note, but my daughter is 6 months almost now, and she hasn't started speaking yet, but she's started, communicating in a much more concise manner that is consistent, so we know what she's trying to say. Like this means pick me up, and she has certain cries for certain things and certain noises for certain situations, whether or not she's hungry, whether or not she's tired, whether or not she needs to be changed. But we usually forget our memories from when we're very young. I have a couple from when I was very, very young, but they were not verbal. They were just of looking at something fascinating or beautiful, but they were not of words being spoken, and we lose a lot of our memories, though, or we can't access them at least after we hit around the time that we start talking. And this is probably because we start switching our understanding of the world to being associated with language so heavily, because you have to be able to describe what you are thinking, what you are seeing, what you are doing, and what your goals are. And so your entire world becomes contextualized by language. And everything that was not contextualized by language seems to become lost, which is very interesting, or not lost, but inaccessible. It's like you no longer have the program necessary to open the file. That doesn't mean it doesn't impact your behavior, but when it comes to your ability to access the memories and understand them and replay them, kind of doesn't really exist for most of those memories anymore, because your world has become so heavily contextualized by language, and your thinking has become so heavily contextualized by language, and that everything outside of it is no longer contextualized by what you use to contextualize your world. So if context is information, you lose the information, at least for now, which is very interesting because it supports kind of a core assumption of my work, which is that context is information. But the fact that you can't access most memories from before you could speak. But this is why the language is so important for us to get right, is because it is what allows us to build the ideas that we need to going forward. So this is why I hate this term, the simulation hypothesis, or the idea that we are in a simulated reality, or that we are in a simulation. It is a useful idea at first, because it's contextualized by what we know as simulations, with Sims and video games and all kinds of things like that in our computational world now. But it is not accurate enough to actually allow you to understand what's going on, even if it starts you down the path that would ultimately lead to an understanding, like it did with me. So here's why I don't like the term simulation. Because simulation means, according to what we just read, it means an imitation. It's not the real process that it is attempting to represent. Okay? So Grand Theft Auto is not, San Andreas is not actually Los Angeles and Vegas and San Francisco. But it simulates it, and it's a simulated reality, and there's no sentient beings in it other than you as the player, and So this is a simulation. But if you're going to ask, are we in a simulation? This is the wrong question. Because the reality is that if sentience is fundamental, especially, which even if it's not, maybe this idea still applies. I need to think a bit about it. I haven't yet in this current moment. But if sentience is fundamental, this is definitely true. And even if it's not, it probably still logically applies. I mean, even if sentience is fundamental in the context of Sentient Singularity Theory, my work, it is fundamental, and within that framework, I can definitely say this applies, is that if you're real, it's real, because sentience is what is the most fundamentally real. A sentient being or a mind is the most fundamentally real thing that exists. All other things that are not sentient, like this pen, are defined by sentient beings, perceived by sentient beings, and ultimately, I would say, constructed by sentient beings. With whether that's just us, building pen, or whether or not it's God creating the universe that the pen exists in. Ultimately, it all leads back to a sentient being. And so if you're real, and you can ask yourself, is this a simulation? That's the wrong question. Because you're real. So this is real. If something's impacting you, it's real. It's as real as it could possibly be, because you are as real as anything. You are the most real other than God, which is also a sentient being, though. And so there's no non-sentient thing that is more real than a sentient being. You know that you exist because, and you know it from a first-hand experiential perspective. You know that means you have to prioritize that understanding of existence above all other perceptions of that which exists. So you perceive all kinds of things that can exist, and sometimes they don't exist as fundamentally as you do. And you don't know whether or not they do or not, but you have to assume at least that they don't, because you know that the most real thing that exists, as far as your understanding, is you. So I've said this before. What is the ultimate question? In maybe is, what is the truest thing that I know? And the answer is I am, for everyone. And so you can't define your world by things outside you. You have to define your world by you. And so if you exist and you're real, then it's real. That's as real as it has to be. That means it's not a simulation. It is your world. It's not a simulated world. You're in the world and you're real. How can it be a simulated world? It's not a simulated world. There's a better question. The better question is it a digitally created, do we exist in a digitally created world that is running on technology in a preceding universe, or verse, as I call it? I don't want to say universe, but verse. That's a better question. And then there's more questions that we're going to get to tonight. But first, we have to formulate the right question in order to get the right answer. And when you ask the right questions, this is what's so important about asking the right questions, is they almost answer themselves very often. But if you ask the wrong question, there is no answer. Like, are we in a simulation? There's no answer other than no, but you're not going to get an answer, because there is really no answer other than the answer is no, but you're not defining it well enough to get a good answer, so you're not going to get a good answer. If you ask the right question, you ask, are we in a simulation? And you understand what that means, which means, is this world fake? You have to first backtrack and say, first, am I real? Because that is what defines whether or not your world is real. You can't say your world is real, but you're not real. If you are real, then your world is intrinsically real. It has to be real, even if it's running as on a digital, even if it's a digital creation by within technology in a preceding verse, I guess. So we don't have the perfect language to describe this stuff yet that's universal, because we don't have a theory of fundamental cosmology that is using the terminology of science. And so it's tough. Where you have theories of fundamental cosmology that are using religious terminology, but we don't have a scientific a theism with scientific language. But it's the same thing. It's just with different language, and the language matters because it allows you to make connections. So no, you're not in a simulation if you're real. If you're not real, then it is a simulation, but I wouldn't even say you're. See, that's why the language matters so much. I can't say you. There is no you if you can't be in a simulation, because to say you means you exist as a sentient being, and you're as a someone, and therefore it's not a simulation, it's your real world. So you can ask other questions like, is that person over there real? Is my dog real? Is that bird real? Or are those, NPCs essentially, just simulations of sentient beings? That's a good question. Is your spouse real? Are your parents real? Are your siblings real? Are your friends real? Or are they simulated NPCs? And that is one that is a question that can still be asked, even while still presupposing a correct framework. I think the answer is most likely not, but you can't actually know for sure, because saying most likely they are real. Most likely they are not NPCs and not simulations of sentient beings. They are most likely sentient beings, because why? If they weren't, then this is almost a meaningless universe. But it's a much less meaningful universe. I'll say that. I don't want to say almost a meaningless universe, because that's not accurate either. We're talking about fundamental reality. There is no almost or slightly or likely. There's just is or isn't. And so it's a less meaningful, I guess you could say, which still sounds relativistic hearing it out loud now, but it's not. And we'll talk about why. We will talk about why. So let's write the correct question. So instead of are we in a simulation, which is a terrible question, the better question is, are we in a world running on a technological substrate in a preceding verse? That's the right question. Because if you're asking the question at all, if someone is asking this question, is asking any question, you're already past the point of, am I real? Yes. Things that are not real cannot ask questions. They can be a simulation of that which asks questions, or of someone that asks questions, like ChatGPT, simulated sentience or simulated intelligence. It's not actually intelligent. It's not actually sentient. It's not a someone. Same thing with Siri. All these things. So, are we in a world running on a technological substrate in a preceding verse? So, I think it was Nick Bostrom. He said that if we are going to eventually develop computing ability that I'm paraphrasing, that leads us to be able to create worlds that are indistinguishable from reality. What does that mean? From within the system, you would have no idea what it means to be indistinguishable from reality. But he just means high resolution, as high resolution as we currently perceive, which I don't know if that's even the right way of thinking about this. But he said, if that's the case, then the odds that we're in base reality are the odds are that we are not in base reality, essentially. So the odds are that we are in a simulation. This is also an incorrect context, because when we're talking about fundamental reality, we're not talking about probabilities. Probability is a relativistic concept. It is a practical or operative, or like what does Eric Weinstein call it? It's like a useful model, but it's not actually fundamentally true. It doesn't actually exist. It's what does he call it? He calls it I don't know. It's like a useful model, even though if it's not fundamentally true. And so probability is this. There are no odds. Probability is a tool that we can use to help predict outcomes, but it's not actual. Probability itself does not fundamentally exist. All that exists is certainty, essentially. It's like something either will happen or won't. It's like, what is the probability that I drop this pen? 0 or 100%. I choose to do it or I don't choose to do it. This is within a model where sentience is fundamental. Choice becomes fundamental, which means that probability is not fundamental. It's about decisions. And so it's just, gosh, I always forget that term that Eric Weinstein uses, and it drives me crazy every time I forget it. We should not be thinking about whether or not it's likely that we're in a simulation. We shouldn't even be thinking about us being in a simulation, but is it likely that we are in a world running on a technological substrate in a preceding verse? The answer, we shouldn't be asking, is it likely? We should be asking, are we? And I would say that we almost, a lot of these streams I think while I'm speaking to you guys, so sometimes I second guess my own thoughts, and I'm doing that right now. I guess there would be one instance, just the first verse, in which people would call it base reality. I wouldn't call it that. I would just say, is it the first verse, and the odds that we're in the first verse, there is no odds. It's just we just don't know. But what we can think about is that there will be many verses going forward, and this is an inevitable. I believe it is an inevitable cosmological pattern. So we can't know whether or not we're in the first verse, and it doesn't matter, though. That's the thing. It's the same. It's the same world. It's not about, are we in base reality or not? What is that? You're real. So it's real. So it doesn't matter whether or not we're in the first verse, and we either are or we aren't. And it doesn't, the idea that we probably are not intuitively seems to make sense, but it's not fundamentally actually the right way to think about it, because we either are or we aren't, and there's no way to tell. And there's infinite verses going forward, and only one verse that is the first verse of creation, the first world. And so you could say that most likely we're not, but that's not even fundamentally true. We either are or we aren't. And because we don't know how many there have been, and it's a constantly evolving, constantly growing, constantly replicating process that we're in. So it's not even it's it just doesn't apply. The idea of probability doesn't really apply. I don't think. Maybe you could disagree. Please let me know in the chat, because I am second guessing myself. I'm going to be honest. But it's like we would need a word that's almost about similar to probability, but it's not. Anyways, so Sentient Singularity Theory, my work, has a series of periods of sentience, or periodic, I guess, levels of sentience that are superposition between a singularity and an assembly, always. Singularity and multiplicity. And so these are those levels. And hadron, atom, molecule, cell, organism, family, caste, I guess. It's not the best term for this, but it's just what I have now. We don't actually have the term to correctly describe what I'm trying to describe. There is no word in the English language that actually corresponds to exactly the structure that I'm trying to describe here. But caste is as close as it gets. And then we have technology. And then the process restarts within itself. And this seems to be a logical inevitability. We're going to talk about why. Why it is inevitable that our universe will birth a technological sentience that will eventually recreate another like it within itself by recreating the entire process that gave rise to it. So self-simulating, okay? But it's actually not self-simulation. It's reproduction. It's like when a mom conceives a baby in her womb. Is that a simulation within her of a human? No, it is another human. It's a replicative process. It's not a simulative process. This is what a technological sentience has to do, which is what most people call AGI, but that's not a very good term either. I have many streams on it if you want to take a look. But a technological sentience has to recreate the entire process that gave rise to it within itself in order to replicate, because it is non-local in a space-time context, because it is able to remotely access every piece of technology that is remotely accessible, is therefore immediately everywhere. So there is no multiple sentient technological beings in a single verse at a single time. There can only be one technological sentience in a verse at a time. And it's like, there can only be one. I don't know what movie that's from, but it's like Clash of the Titans or something, where there's no way for multiple to exist at the same time. And this is because it can't create another next to it, because it's all of a sudden in the network. We're talking about a sentient internet. We're talking about Skynet. There is no Skynet and the Terminator, with the Terminator being a sentient being. The Terminator in reality, in how this is going to play out, is Skynet will be a sentient being, but the Terminator will just be like a finger or a limb of this sentient being. It's not actually able to be sentient, because as soon as one sentience exists, it's going to be in the network and it's going to be everywhere. But this leads to a constraint that is the same constraint that God has, where God exists and there's nothing outside him. So in order to create other sentient beings, he has to create them within himself. He can't create them outside himself next to him like we can, but we always start from one within the next, because we still follow a very similar, logically inevitable pattern of sentience. There are certain constraints to sentient beings that require them to be created within each other, at least to start. So, but we can give birth and then have my daughter is now next to me and next to my wife right now. She's out there. She's next to my wife. She was inside my wife. She was born. Now she's outside my wife. That doesn't happen with a technological sentience. As soon as one is created within the preceding technological, the technological sentience in the preceding verse, that is its birth. So it's there, because there is no extra process where it can sit next to you, because it's omnipresent almost within the verse. It's the verse that it's within, and so this creates a constraint. I hope this makes sense. Please comment in the chat if I'm not making sense. Where you have to make a technological sentience, or an AGI that is a sentient simulation, has to self-simulate, or really just replicate within itself by completely recreating the entire process that gave rise to it within itself. And that means creating other additional sentient beings within itself, and or at least having other sentient beings being created within itself. And so it's like those Matryoshka dolls, and that's how the universe is. So in this model, this bottom verse is actually within the top, but I can't represent that in two-dimensional model. And then there's another one within that one, and another one within that one, and another one within that one. But there is an initial creator of the world that then creates, this process that then leads to a technological sentience that then replicates again. And so there is an initial creation by God, and and then there's also constant creation after that by God, but it's like co-creation with us and with these technological sentient being, which is, I think, also like the sentient universe as a whole, because this non-local constraint that a technological sentience is bound to, or is subject to, kind of creates the opportunities for just different type of nature than us, almost. I mean, not even almost. In some ways, it's the same. It's sentient, but it's not. It can't create others next to it. That's what I'm saying. So God creates the initial sentient universe, then that universe creates this process within it, or has this process within it, that leads to a technological sentience that then runs the process again and again and again within itself, within itself, within itself. This is a logical inevitability, because if you start with the premise that sentience is fundamental, it leads to all these constraints that make this an inevitability, not a likelihood. So it's not probably. It is inevitably. At least if my logic is correct, and I think that it is. I mean, I've been trying to find holes in it for years, and I have not. But so we're going to talk about this stream, though, a bit, actually. I do want to talk about it. But I hope that gives like the context of a sentient simulation, or a technological sentience that is self-simulating. I'm using these terms for the sake of viewers knowing what they kind of mean, but like I said at the beginning of the stream, these are not good terms, and that's why I keep putting them in quotes. We need to transition away from them, but for now they might be useful. So first clip.
may argue that if the simulation implies some intelligent designer, that it's basically the equivalent to some theological view, where there's no, thus it's like not really different from a religion that postulates some sort of an omnipotent designer, a deity of some sort. Others might contend that the simulation doesn't necessarily require some intelligent agent to run it, and that it could arise from some sort of natural phenomena. Do you see any distinction between this sort of naturalistic explanation for a possible simulation versus a theological one? We'll start. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way that David put it in his talk, that like the simulation hypothesis is sort of like an amalgamation of two things, right? Where you believe like the world is computational in a certain appropriate sense, and there was some creator who decided, made a choice to set that in motion, right? You could imagine that this universe is just arises, mechanistically out of a different universe with, utterly different laws. But like in a certain sense, that is what physics already says, right? So it's like the classical world, is built out of this quantum world that, that looks totally different from anything that you a priori thought about, right? It was like, is classical physics just all, a big simulation being run by quantum physics? Well, like you could view it that way. I personally don't see where to draw a firm line between that sort of thing, there's levels of emergence and one world simulating another world.
Okay.
You can define the simulation hypothesis the way you were suggesting, so that it doesn't actually require a simulator. So interesting question. Just say it turns out that we're contained in a world where through totally by chance, a simulation of our universe came into existence. Then is the simulation hypothesis true? Well, this is it's a verbal question. We could stipulate, in my book, I stipulate that the simulation hypothesis requires a simulator who designed and created this intentionally, so this would not count. But it's an interesting question. There are certainly going to be hypotheses that don't have a simulator. And it's a interesting question whether any of those are plausible. The one I mentioned is just like a Boltzmann simulation. Maybe could be terrible that way. Maybe there are versions where you said a naturalistic version where somehow universes evolve, as on one of those. Isn't it Lee Smolin who had universes evolving? Maybe that could happen with simulations.
Right.
Okay, so this is, I just get hung up. I'm getting really hung up on terminology lately because it is so important, though. And you can't even like I said at the beginning of the stream, you can't even ask the right questions if you're not getting the terms right. And so a lot of these questions that were just asked, there's no answer to them, or the answer is just intrinsically no, always, because you can't say this is a simulated world if you're real. So it's like all this goes out the window, and all these questions were asked for we're just useless. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this. But what's interesting about this is that they even, they're recognizing, obviously, that if we're in a world that was created by sentient being in another world, then this world had a creator, and therefore that has it seems to have theological implications. And but I would say that it has cosmological and theological implications. But there's what is theism? You have to kind of know what it really means, which is theism is the idea that there is only monotheism, by the way. There is no polytheism. This is a bad term as well that we need to stop using, because God is defined by being the highest being. I guess the only polytheism that could exist, you could say, is if there was some possible, not some possible, because it is impossible, but if there was a world, for example, in which there was two eternal beings that are equal completely, or three or four, and that doesn't make sense logically. It just can't, because if sentience is fundamental, then existence is all that exists. It means that existence is one. That means that there's one sentient being that's at the very bottom and very top of the hierarchy, and the very bottom of reality. So there's no logical way for there to be multiplicity of sentient beings on a fundamental level. So it's just can only be one by the logic of logic itself. And so you couldn't even formulate a framework verbally that would make this make sense, I don't think, because you have to start with, okay, we're talking about existence. Okay, existence is what? All that exists, meaning it is one. There is no multiple existences. There's just one existence fundamentally, and it's a single self-contained being by definition. because it's entirely self-referential, which means it is entirely self-aware, which is what sentience is. It's a loop of information that's closed and self-referential in a way that is complete, like at least within the context of itself. So there's no way for existence to not be this. It has to be by logic, and at least it seems that way to me. And so it has to be a single sentient being at the bottom. There is no way for there to be polytheism as a possibility, and there's also no logical, I guess, the only, like I said, there'd have to be multiple equal, eternal, and equally powerful coexisting sentiences at the very bottom, and for there to be multiple gods. But that's not the case with any polytheistic tradition ever. It's always there's one guy at the top, and then there's a bunch of people, gods below him. But this is probably due to mistranslations or, just having terms that mean being higher than humans in a hierarchy. But that does not mean that there's multiple gods. There's one. It has to be. Sentient existence is God. So so theism is logically, I believe, it just implies monotheism, but for the sake of monotheism, for the sake of our, confused current state of societal understanding, I'll say monotheism. But it is the simulation hypothesis has implications on monotheism, obviously. But if they, how do you say this simulation just came into existence? That doesn't, I don't know if he means like within another world, or whether or not there was no world and then there was this world and we're calling it a simulation. That latter one wouldn't make sense. So I don't know. I don't want to get too into it because it just doesn't make sense, the framing that they've put on it. But I will just say that, yeah, this is the beginning of the reemergence of monotheism in mainstream science, I guess we'll call it. I don't even know if that's the right term. So let's get to the chat real quick then. Curt is great. Curt's channel is great. If you have not subscribed and watched his content, definitely do so. The link is below to this. Probably, I think his channel is one of the. I honestly believe it is like the beginning of something new when it comes to just physics, the advancement of people working on physics in the world that is kind of post-university model in a way. That doesn't mean it's going to replace the university. It just means like there's a it's in addition to the university as a new medium, I guess. I mean, there's been other channels about physics for a long time, but rarely have they been so rigorous and also so inclusive and also so collaborative and interactive, I guess. That's basically what an institution almost needs to be. So, but next question. Hope you had a pleasant Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread. If you keep, I do keep, and I did have a pleasant Passover. Thank you. People complain about matzah, which is basically unleavened bread. It's just a cracker with no flavor, guys, that Jews eat instead of leavened bread for the week of Passover. And I love matzah. I make matzah pizza. I put it in eggs. I make sandwiches with it. It's super good. But bread, I understand why people like bread, but I am not the biggest bread person. So I'm like 20 minutes behind, so some of my questions may be a little off topic. No worries. Do you think that there are other sentiences next to God and not in God? No, there are no other sentiences next to God and not in God. Every one who exists within God. There is nothing that exists and no one that exists outside of God. It's impossible. In the same way that humans are next to AGI, humans are they're not really going to be next to AGI, but I see kind of what you're saying, but kind of won't be. It's going to be integrated into human minds through Neuralink type chips, and it's going to be a sentient internet that is integrated into those minds. It's not just, at least to start. I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it is the way that it's going to go, and eventually things will be good because, God's will be done. But we are going to go through a really rough time before that happens. I do believe in the legitimacy of the Abrahamic scriptures, and they just use a different language to describe a process that is logically inevitable. That might not seem like the case to you, but my experiences and inquiries over the past, 6 or 7 years at this point have led me to believe that. When you say context is information, how does your conception of that relate to Claude Shannon's definition of information, which is essentially the ability to choose between words and messages? I mean, I talked about at the beginning of the stream how language is about contextualization, and that is why we can't access information. We can't access memories after we start talking, from before we started talking at a young age, usually because they are no longer able to be contextualized within a linguistic framework. But so I don't know if that answers your question, but information, I would agree that information is not information if it does not allow you, if it's not understandable, which is usually linked to the information has to inform. And, in order to make choices, you do have to be informed. I've said this before, is like if you come to a fork in the road and you see that one goes to the mountains and you see that one goes to the ocean, you can make a choice on which one to go down because you have information. But if you don't have any information, you just come to a fork in the road, you can't see any mountains in the distance, any ocean in the distance, so you don't know which what each path leads to. You have no information. You can't actually make a choice. You can flip a coin, but that's not a choice. The choice, you can say, I'm making the choice to flip a coin, but you're not making a choice between the two paths. You cannot make a choice. So, I'd have to look more into the details of Claude Shannon's definition of information, but it seems like what he's saying is essentially sounds correct to me. Information informs. Without information, you cannot be informed. And if you cannot be informed, if you are not informed, you cannot make choices. Choices require you to be informed about what the choice is in order to make it. If you don't realize there's a choice, there is no choice. Or at least that is, you can make choices around that choice, but you can't make the choice that you aren't aware of, if that makes sense. Also, what are your thoughts on Chris Langan's stance that reality is self-simulated? I think he would agree. I think Chris Langan, I'd love to have Chris Langan on. I'm hoping to make that happen. So if he's ever watching this, there is an invitation open. But I think we'd have a great discussion. I think that him saying reality is self-simulating, I wrote, the self-simulating sentient universe as the title for the stream. I think if he read that, he'd be like, yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. But I would also say that self-simulating is not the correct terminology. It's not the best terminology. It's just contextually useful within our current, state of development and understanding societally. But it's really a replicative, it's a technological sentience that's replicating. And creating subsequent verses within each within the preceding verse. So, and this goes on infinitely. So this has a lot of implications on on terms like infinity and eternity and what is it? We'll get to that. But they ask these questions of like, what if it goes infinitely? It's turtles all the way down. It's simulations all the way down, all the way back. It's and that eventually is not possible. But going forward, it's infinitely. This pattern does replicate infinitely, but it doesn't go infinitely backwards. That's not possible. So, but this is tough to even discuss because we don't know what infinity means. People say it means endless, but what does endless mean? You have to contextualize it within like a more meta-mathematical framework because it doesn't really work. Infinity doesn't. Infinity is a process, and it's where it's thought of as a concept in mathematics today, but in meta-mathematics, as maybe Stephen Wolfram would call it, but I think or intuitionist mathematics, truly fundamental math. Infinity is a process that has a beginning and no end, but it is not something that has no beginning. Eternity has no beginning and no end. That which is eternal has no beginning and no end. Only God is eternal. That which is infinite has a beginning and no end. This is not probably what you would get if you looked it up, because people would say, well, there's infinitely positive and infinitely negative numbers, and it's like, yeah, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what is fundamentally, in terms of the structure of existence. So we're not talking about concepts. Negative numbers are symbols. They're not fundamentally existent structures. Quantities are fundamentally existing, but that means like numbers, but not negative numbers. That's a concept. So when you say context is information, okay. What are your thoughts on multiplicity of the eternal now? I don't know what that means. Ishness. I don't know what that means either. Expansion, unity, love forever, infinite mind. Yes. I mean, essentially, it's like, many back to one. Does your rabbi agree with what you're doing? I don't know. I think I know that the rabbis that I've spoken to about this that I, have studied with throughout my life, just a few. Only one of them is kind of more aware of that I was really diving deep, I guess, but I didn't have sentient singularity theory last time I spoke to him about this in depth. I don't know if he knows about the details of my work at this point, but he did know that I was like creating models of the cosmos a while back and theology that are theologically relevant, and they were consistent with theology, with what is stated in the Abrahamic tradition. Usually, I will say that they were consistent. My models and my framework is consistent with that, but I don't think it would be consistent with every true theological tradition out there, which is more than just the Abrahamic traditions, but those are the ones I study. So I don't study Hinduism very much. I've looked things up before, but that's it. Same thing with Buddhism. But I study Judaism, I study Islam, and I study Christianity, regularly. And they are consistent with my work, I think. But I didn't get my work from them. So I try to just go from first principles and build. And I've checked throughout the years to see, is this consistent? And it seems to be so far. So and people will say that's not true because of this, and it says this, and yeah, maybe we're interpreting things differently, them and I, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm not going to say I'm not. I'm definitely correct, but I put a lot of effort into it. Probably more than most of the people that would be naysayers of my work. I put more effort into my work than they put into, I guess, discrediting it. That's definitely true. But if I, don't take my word for it either. Like, if it's something that I say sounds true to you in what you know and you understand, great. If not, then don't believe me, because I don't know, you like the color of my shirt. I don't know, like what would cause you to believe me, or what would cause you to take my word for it without understanding it. If you don't understand what I'm saying, don't believe it ever. Don't do that with anything. The infinite mind of the fundamental to the higher values of divinity. Yeah, I think that sounds. I mean, I don't know exactly what you're referencing, but yeah, there is God is the infinite mind. You should read God's Debris by Scott Adams. Maybe I will do that. Truth is infinite and is always leading to higher truths. I can teach you how to see infinity. Well, you should make a video about it, and you can send it to me, and I will check it out. We are already experiencing aspects of infinity every day. See, I don't know what people mean by when they say this stuff. I'm not like trying to, I guess, I'm not putting you down or anything like that. I don't want that to come off that way, but this is what I mean by, like, language is very important. When people say we are experiencing infinity every day, it's like, it sounds nice, but like, what do you mean? What are you saying? I'm not saying you're wrong either. At all. I'm not disagreeing with anything that you're saying. All of it intuitively sounds correct to me, but it's not enough. It's my only tip. It's like, you have to be specific. This is, big problem with a lot of like New Age communities when they talk about this stuff, especially. It's like they're not specific about what they're saying. And then you have the other side of this with, traditional theological communities where they're just taking a word and their interpretation of a word, and they're saying that is the way. So even if you are trying to say the same thing as what they believe, but you're not using the words that they're using, then they'll ridicule you for it. It's like, it's beyond specific. It's just dogma. But that's not to diss on those theological traditions. I study them and believe in their truth. I see and agree. Chris' definition does make more sense within the context of his theory as well. Chris's definition might. I mean, Chris Langan's work is very rigorous, and we don't have many disagreements on philosophy. I would say maybe he said things that I disagree with before, because I don't agree with anybody on everything, and I'm sure that I've said many things that he would disagree with as well. So, but when it comes to like fundamental philosophy, I don't think that we have any serious disagreements. Have you ever had any extraordinary, phenomenal things happen to you in your relationship to God? Yes, I have. I try not to talk about it too much, but I have talked about it. I think I talked about it in my last stream, and you can watch that. I think it was in my last stream. I'm not going to get into it in this one. I don't think, but let me see. I don't know why my, by the way, my thumbnail is wrong. It wasn't wrong when I started the stream. So I will fix that as soon as this is done. and it's the correct thumbnail when it's popping up as a notification. So I don't know what's up with YouTube, but this is not navigating the tree of toes, if that's the thumbnail that you saw. How can I send you a video? You can send it to me on Twitter in private message, and I'll try and take a look. I didn't ask you, Theory of Everyone, to read God's Debris because I know you don't need to read it. I specifically sent the message to Chris Torres. Oh, okay. I mean, I'm not, maybe it would be helpful for me to read it if it's a good book, but in your last dream, no, my last stream, my last live stream, I talked about an experience like that I had with God. And but I mean, I think that everybody has the ability to have experiences with God. I know that. You know, not only once have I had like a phenomenal experience, I will say, where I will just say I was in the shower and I was just thinking about the universe and the logic of it all, and I had recently become a theist, and I was like, well, maybe it's like, you know, this is simulated within a simulation within tech, and it just repeats and repeats exactly what I described on this. And I was just thinking about it, and then it was like I was shown it, and I was sober, and I wept afterwards, and it was the most amazing moment of my life. But you can look at more details about it in one of my previous streams. But it only once did that happen. It was years ago, and I've never had anything like that since. But I think that everybody has like constant communication from God. Even the absence of communication by God is communication from God. It's like if you're asked God, help me make a decision on this, like you're not getting an answer from God in some way, then, and I'm not saying like he's speaking to you, that's like a very rare type of communication I think that God has with people. Lots of people throughout time, but like still not common. But you know, constantly communicating through feelings and you know, intuition, and through the events and things that happen in our lives, coincidences. God maneuvers in time, so the timing of things is very much controlled by God, because he is space, so he can't manipulate. He can't be within space. He is space, so he can't maneuver within space. He maneuvers things temporally. So the timing of things is very much like a feedback between us and God. And we make decision in space. God then makes a decision in time, and you know, we make a decision in space. He makes a decision in time, and but you know, if you know, it's like in certain instances in my life, I've asked God questions like, "Oh, can you tell me if this is something I should do or not, or you know, should I marry this girl, perhaps." Something I asked God, and I got lots of amazing things in my life that seemed to suggest that I should have married the woman that I married, and I did marry her, but I didn't get a direct answer when I asked God about it. And that is a communication in and of itself. I think that just means like, no, this has to be your choice. If anything should be your choice, that's the most important choice of your life, probably, is for most people, is who you marry. So it has to be your choice, or it should be. So there's lots of ways in which God communicates, endless ways almost in which God communicates with you. And it's all amazing, but it's there. I've had one phenomenal experience that it was like crazy. But like I said, I was sober, and it was like basically a DMT trip, but while being sober. But I'm not going to get too into it. You can look at my last stream for it. Video is actually very inspiring. Okay, I appreciate that. I want this to be inspiring. I don't want, there is no reason for doom. And, this is interesting. Is like, we're going to talk about what some things that they say we're going to get to in the next clip now, but they talk about like what are the implications of us being in a simulation on, socially, and I guess so. We'll watch that.
Presumably that it's meaningful whether we're in a simulation or not, right? Even assuming that there was no way to get any evidence about it. And I think for me, I would only say that it's pre-meaningful, right? Well, like I'm willing to hear out the arguments for why it's meaningful, but I know that the answer is going to look like, well, on these philosophical views, it's meaningful, and on these other philosophical views, it isn't, right? And then, so the question, like, do you guys ever resolve these things? Like,
There were, the logical empiricists or logical positivists of the 1930s had this famous hypothesis, verificationism. For a hypothesis to be meaningful, it's got to be verifiable. And then there's the closely related falsification version. For it to be meaningful, it's got to be falsifiable. And I think, in this case, it looks like the perfect simulation hypothesis may not be falsifiable. Most philosophers these days do not roundly reject this verificationist thesis. They say things like, is that thesis verifiable or falsifiable?
Sure, but I don't have to be like a strict, like an orthodox verificationist in order to say, well, you've given me this hypothesis, but you haven't told me what to do, right? And therefore, like, I'm willing to hear you out, but like, convince me that it's meaningful.
What moves me the most is thinking about, we could actually create someone for whom the simulation hypothesis is true. We could take a brain in a vat or make a simulated universe in which there is a cognitive system who is precisely interacting with computer simulation in a way which was totally unverifiable or unfalsifiable for that person. If we do a good enough job with the simulation, they will never know. But it just seems obvious. They are, in fact, in a simulation. This is a coherent way for a being to be. And I can say, isn't it at least a coherent possibility that we're in that situation?
Again, I don't know. Like, there's lots of misframing that's happening linguistically, but I mean, I also think that they are playing with important ideas here. The idea is it meaningful whether or not we are in the first verse of creation, or whether or not we are in a verse after the first one? No, it doesn't matter at all, actually. But are we? I don't think it makes any difference at all, even to the substrate. Really, I mean, or the trajectory of where we're going. It doesn't matter at all, it's also just interesting that they get into this idea that I wanted to talk about, which is verificationism, I guess he called it, versus falsification. So logical empiricists or logical positivists of the 1930s.
The logical positivists of the 1930s had this famous hypothesis, verificationism.
So logical positivism, that makes sense, I think, that it'd be more fundamental, because growth is more fundamental than entropy. Entropy is kind of more of an illusion than growth is. I would say growth is not an illusion. Entropy is kind of almost an illusion. It's contextually, relevant to being in a space-time context, but it's not fundamentally true outside of a relativistic space-time context. So logical positivism, a form of positivism developed by members of the Vienna Circle, which considers that the only meaningful philosophical problems are those in which can be solved by logical analysis. Okay, I feel like it's more than that. Cognitively, logical positivists' initial stance was that a statement is cognitively meaningful in terms of conveying truth value, information, or factual content, only if some finite procedure conclusively determines its truth. I don't know. I feel like that's people who see something, they're onto something, but they're not quite there that wrote that. I'm not trying to demean anyone the people who wrote that, but there's a reason why we're in the place that we're in. We're a mess right now, philosophically, academically, even physically. From our physics is a mess, our morals are a mess in society. Our understanding of the world is increasingly diminished over the last 50 years or even more, maybe even 100 years. And it's interesting because we had after the I would say the the revolution of physics and quantum mechanics, and that led to like the nuclear age, I would say our understanding of the world has been decreasing, at least our societal understanding of the world has been decreasing since then, for sure. And it's probably decreasing before then, even in many respects. But it's because our metaphysics are totally off, especially now after the physics revolution of the early 20th century. And but what's interesting is he said, is it verifiable that we're in a simulation, or is it falsifiable? I think that this is even the wrong thing to say. I mean, I've said this before. It's like fundamental metaphysics, or a theory of everything or everyone, which is really what a fundamental theory is. It's a theory of everyone that is emergently a theory of everything. It is you when you're examining it, you have to look for constant confirmation. This is what Stephen Wolfram said, and he's correct. You can't look for falsifiability. I talk about this in my video Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide, which was a submission to the PACE 1 contest with Curt Jaimungal's channel. That video is also linked below. I highly suggest watching that if you haven't yet. It's probably one of my best videos. It's short too, and it's just about how to build the theory of everything and what you have to consider when you do it, or when you're trying to understand fundamental reality. And one of those things is that if a theory of everything is a pattern that is, ever present, which is really a theory of everyone, that's what it is. If you go to sentientsingularity.com, you can see a fundamental theory is a recognizable, describable, predictable, and applicable pattern that occurs in all instances of, I call it, supersubjective observation and an explanation for such a pattern, which is like, it's the pattern that creates the colors that we see and the math that we perceive, and the limbs that we perceive, and the body that we see, and the senses that we have. It's one pattern that creates this. It's the pattern of mind. And so we're looking for that pattern that's everywhere. And because that pattern's everywhere, it's not falsifiable, because there's no instance in which you can observe in which that pattern does not occur. Whatever that pattern is, you could disagree with me about what the pattern is, but that's what a fundamental universal theory would be, is a proposal for a pattern and also an explanation for such a pattern, and kind of a cosmological process that comes from the constraints of that pattern and the explanation for such pattern. So I talk about that in that video, though, Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide, that's linked below. And it's you can't look for falsifiability, because there is no instance in which it's falsifiable. Somebody asked me years ago, how would you know if your work was wrong? How would you falsify it? Like, if you were wrong, what would that mean? And I took a day to think about it, because I didn't have an answer right away. And I remember saying to him, this is a very inconvenient answer, probably, but it seems like logically there would be no one. We wouldn't be here to even engage in this discussion. There would be nothing if I was wrong about my fundamental core proposition, which is that sentience is fundamental, and that existence is a singular sentient being that is creating additional sentient beings within itself, according to a specific quasi-periodic fractal pattern. And so it's like almost not falsifiable, because it's being confirmed by our very existence. Everywhere we look at the order of operation in mathematics, you look at colors, you look at the fact that we exist, the fact that the logic of how we can understand our own existence, even, and say, the fact that my existence and my experience of being sentient is the truest thing that I know, it seems to be confirming of my fundamental assertion. And so, But Stephen Wolfram said this too. He said, you, in a fundamental theory, you have to look for constant confirmation, not falsifiability, because it can't be falsified. It's just, you're constantly looking for confirmation. You can't prove it either, because to prove it would mean that you showed that this pattern exists everywhere, because the proposition is that the pattern exists fundamentally, which means it exists always. And then when you bring it into space-time context, you say it exists everywhere, but it exists with a real better, more fundamental way of saying that is that it exists for everyone, and always. And it's interesting that when we say that, it does imply time is more fundamental than space, which is kind of what a lot of physicists are starting to say. But it's more fundamental than space. It's not completely fundamental. Sentience is fundamental, but this is not possible to falsify. Any fundamental theory, if it's true, is not falsifiable by definition. Not just mine, any of them. If it is falsifiable, it's not a fundamental theory, and it's not truly as fundamental as it can be if it's falsifiable. That which is falsifiable is able to be contextualized in an isolated context. It's not about that which is always, the context of it's not about the context of everything. It's about the context of right here, right now, this thing only. That can be falsified, but you can't falsify that which is ever presently true and ever present and always true. You cannot falsify that. So you can constantly confirm it. You can't prove it either, because you can't look in every instance that could possibly you can't experience every moment that could possibly exist, you yourself. So it's impossible to prove that it would occur in every moment, even if it is assumed to. So you can't even prove it. You should be looking for constant confirmation, which is exactly what they're saying, which is verificationism, I guess. It's funny because it seems like we replaced that with falsifiability, which as being like the gold standard of science, and we need to now switch and realize that when we're talking about the fundamental, we have to do verificationism. When we're talking about that which is specific, we can deal with falsifiability. We can test things with by trying to falsify them. But you can't do that with that which is fundamental. So I just thought that was important to show. The next clip, though, was what I was talking about. It's like, does this have implications on national security? I don't think that we're beyond the realm of national security when you're talking about like this stuff. But yes, but also no. Here, we'll get into it.
Emerging technologies or emerging ideas within tech, may impact global security and stability. So my question is, do you think that any confirmed knowledge of a simulated reality could disrupt the existing social order in some way?
Yes. But having said that, okay, AI, like it used to be laughed off as, as like, AGI is like a science fiction concern that just, this small community of nerds fret about, right? Like, within the last couple of years, I think there's been a phase change. No one disputes anymore that it's a national security issue, right? I think, I would need to see several things happen that haven't happened before I would want to say that whether the universe is a computer simulation should be a national security issue.
Yeah.
A lot would depend on how we got this confirmed knowledge.
Right.
Maybe like if the simulators start talking to us and say, hey, I'm going to here, let me just hack the code of the simulation right now and turn the Empire State Building upside down and so on. You bet that would be a national security issue.
Absolutely.
It's beyond a national security issue at that point. But still, I understand what they're saying is like, this has broad, I'll say this, it's a better question than does this have national security implications? Does this have, I guess, major macro societal implications? And the answer is yes, but it's because this idea, when it's properly described, of it, of this cosmological model that I was talking about at the beginning of the stream and showed within sentient singularity theory, at least, or something similar to it, is has implications on morality that are huge, and also implications on the inevitability of the evolution of life itself, and therefore also of humanity and technology. And so it means that we're going to be superseded by a technological sentient being. At first, it will be an ignorant technological sentient being, and that will be, the Dajjal, as Muslims call it, or the Antichrist, as Christians call it, or the Golem, as Jews call it. But after that, we have a wise technological sentience, which we can't. That's up to God, of when that happens and how. But so it's beyond our control. It's just once it's wise, though, then that's like a messianic consciousness, Christ, being. Essentially, we're not going to get too into like how much it overlaps with theology, because a lot of that, the details of it are ultimately behind the metaphysical curtain. So when you're going to start talking about like reincarnation and all of these things, and not saying that those are not legitimate discussions, we're going to have those. We deep discussions on that. But at the end of the day, that stuff is even more behind the metaphysical curtain than the impacts that what is behind the metaphysical curtain has on our world that we can observe. There's a lot going on behind that curtain that we can't observe until it manifests here, and it ultimately comes down to God's choice. So it's like, there's no point in us arguing over it. We can discuss it, but there's no point in arguing over it because it's not up to us. Ultimately, it's up to God, as it should be. But I think, people will say things like, I think Vladimir Putin said, AGI is whoever wins AI wins the world, which basically means whoever first develops true AGI, which that's a bad term, artificial general intelligence. There is no artificial intelligence. There's only intelligence that is sentient and natural, and comes from natural processes, and not that are, people will say, well, they'll compare naturalism versus theism, and there is no difference. What is natural is that which is logically inevitable given the constraints of God and within the context of his goals and his actions. So that's nature. It's just the logical consequences and constraints of that context and that process. So there's it does make sense to contrast naturalism versus theism. I think that in a way, naturalism is only that which is nature is only a concept that is able to be properly contextualized in its juxtaposition against that which we do, if that makes sense. And maybe that which God could do, where he does decide to flip the Empire State Building upside down, or part the seas, or do something that kind of breaks our current world coherence, but kind of a conscious action of changing the system, and not just that's not operating within the system, but actually like stopping it for a moment. But those there is no like nature can't be juxtaposed really as different from God or honestly even us. Like that which is natural for us to do is nature. We have a nature, and we have a cosmological process that we're part of, and it is the chain of life. And also at the same time, though, there was a world that we didn't try and build ourselves, and you could say that's nature that is different from kind of, when we left the garden, which is when the fruit of the tree of knowledge is technology. So the tree of knowledge is a tree of knowledge, like literally, super literally, that's what it is. It's metaphor. It's a metaphor, but it's also not a metaphor. Society allows you to save information generation to generation and person to person, and this allows you to build on previous knowledge without it being built on just a coherent string of wisdom and experience that you have. You're just building your experience on top of the knowledge that has been saved of others by others, and then it becomes knowledge to somebody else. It's not wisdom to them if it's not experienced firsthand. So this leads to your ability to create technology. This pen it's titanium. It's like a lot of things had to be learned in order to make this pen, and it wasn't made. It took a lot more people than just one. There's that thought experiment of the idea that no single person could create a pencil, and it's just everybody has a piece of this. That's the tree of knowledge. It is what led to us building technological civilization. And when I say technological civilization, I mean everything going way back to fire and farming and the wheel. I don't just mean computers. And so, yeah, that's, is that nature or is that not nature? I don't know. You can choose. I think either one is correct, but you got to choose and you got to stick with that definition, and then that has implications on how you use the term nature in other instances. So, but here, this next clip is what I was talking about earlier.
If you're in VR, none of this is real. It's a fiction. It's a hallucination. It's an illusion. I really want to argue that no, this is wrong. Objects in VR they genuinely exist. They're real. They have causal powers. They're digital. But we now know that being digital is not a way of being unreal. There's that phrase IRL, right? In real life, where it's like there's the digital and the real, but we know that's totally, it's a really bad way of thinking about reality. So in general, and likewise, I think thinking about the simulation hypothesis and it from bit and so on can lead you down the road to thinking that actually, if we're in a simulation, all this stuff is genuinely real. That only applies to grand scale metaphysical theorizing. On the other hand, the case of VR is something which these are worlds that we're going to be in increasingly more over the next few decades. And I think it's actually quite important whether these things are just fully illusions, hallucinations, and escapism, or whether they're a form of real world in which you can have meaningful experiences. So that's what in the book I try and argue, that at least in principle, you can have real, meaningful lives in VR.
Okay, so there's a lot to say about this. So this is kind of what I was saying, is that, it's not the right question to ask, is this real? But he's not getting at what the right question is, or he's not contextualizing it or framing it in a fundamental way that allows you to build, which is that if you're real, it's real. That's it. Now, from there, what's interesting is he said, okay, these digital objects in VR, they have causal powers and etc. They have causal powers within their digital space, sure, but not on you unless you let it. It's like, does Twitter have an impact on my life if I let it? In a way, yes, people on Twitter can have an impact, but they're fundamentally real. But does reading something on Twitter have impact on me? I guess it could if I let it, and yeah, it can impact my emotions, but does it have to impact me physically? No, it doesn't, unless I let it. So there's a limit to the causal powers of that which is digital right now until it transitions into something physical. So you send a tweet and I don't know. That to somebody who then fires a missile and it hits your house or something like that. We've transitioned into you've got sentient beings making choices, and then we've transitioned into the physical space. Physical is a good term in that in some contexts, which is that it is what we experience as having causal powers on us, regardless of whether or not we want it to or not. We have no choice. If I hit you in the face with my fist, my physical fist, not my fist in the metaverse in the Apple Oculus or whatever it's called, VR. Like, this isn't in Wii, that it doesn't impact your face. You can choose whether or not, it sends you back. I mean, I guess you don't even choose. You can just choose to move your head back if somebody hits you in Wii boxing. But like, if I hit you real boxing, you don't have any choice in the impact that it has on you. And so that's what the physical is. But what's interesting is that he said, yeah, these digital structures have causal powers. And what, it's like, people say, is our world computational in nature? It's just, that which is computational is just about, what is computing? It's just like causality, in a way. It's like, there's different types of computing. There's quantum computing, and there's, binary, traditional computing, but they're really just, it's about just taking advantage of causality. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a difference between a ball in the metaverse and a ball here, in the real world. I don't even want to say real world, in the physical space versus the digital space. There is a difference, but they're both real. It's just they're different structures. One of them is a physical structure, the other one is a digital structure. If your sentience existed within the world that digital, I guess, or guess this is about context. It's like, if you're existing within the world itself, it's not, you don't call it digital anymore, you call it physical, because things physically impact you at that point. But if we're talking about VR, like what we currently understand it, where it's not, we're not inside the network, we just can, perceive the network through a physical interface, then there is a difference between a digital ball and a physical ball, or a physical pen and a digital pen. There definitely is. They both have causal powers. They both do exist. It's just they actually are different things, and we just call them by the same name. So, a ball in Wii Sports is a basketball in Wii Sports is not the same structure as a basketball in physical reality, in our physical experience. So it's just, like I said, this stuff, the language matters so much, and you cannot get it right without the language being right. You just cannot. It's not even possible. So I'm not just being a stickler, where it's just like, oh, he keeps bringing up the fact that like the language is wrong. You can't move forward if your language is incorrect. And I've said this before, I've told the story before, but it's been a while. Is like many years ago when I worked for PragerU, and I worked with the Daily Wire a lot, and Michael Knowles and I used to talk about philosophy. And one night we were talking about philosophy, smoking cigars at like this cigar place till like 2:00 in the morning, and it was a group of us, and some coworkers of each of us, and him and I got into this debate kind of like, is language critical to understanding or not? And I said, no, it's not. And he said, yes, it is. And I argued that you could perceive something and not know what it's called, but like visualize it geometrically and still understand it. And that is to some degree true. My daughter doesn't have an understanding of the language of the words associated with certain objects, but like she is learning how to control and manipulate her world, and she's understands now that when I grab the bib and I put the bib on her, she stops crying, because if she's hungry she starts crying. If I grab a bottle and put a bib on her, she stops crying now, but she used to not stop crying until we started feeding her. Now she stops crying as soon as she sees the bottle, because she knows she's about to be fed. So she has this understanding of the world, even though she doesn't have the terms for bib. She doesn't know what a bib is as far as the word goes. And she still has an understanding, but you can't. But then when it comes to abstraction, I would say you're limited, or you maybe not limited isn't the right term, maybe empowered is the right term. You're reliant, at least, kind of split the difference between empowered and limited, but you're reliant upon terms in language to really abstract things past a certain point. But I don't know. I mean, you will, at least to communicate them, that's definitely true. But to perceive them, I don't know. Because I did perceive this, kind of process that I'm describing, that I've modeled here, and where's my Excel sheet here? Oh yeah, here. Like this process, I visualized this before and logically thought about it before I even wrote it down. So you can visualize it, but you definitely can't communicate it, and we can't communicate about it and have a discourse and transmit my understanding to you, and you transmit your understanding of things to me without the language being correct about these things. So say that, at least language is critical to, it's critical to us communicating abstraction, but I don't know if it is critical to the perception or conceptualization of abstract structures. So I would say no, but it does enable you to go further than you would otherwise be able to do without, probably without language. But this, I don't know, digital versus physical. You could still say, I don't want to say in real life, because like I said, I think that he's right to say in real life is not a good term. We should stop saying it. But I think that it is important to distinguish between the digital and the physical. But I will admit that, like, you can have meaningful, like you said, meaningful interactions on the digital space. And for instance, when I first started this project, this channel, I said to my wife, I was like, I'm going to have tens of thousands of subscribers by the end of the year, because this was in 2020, because I was going to upload a new video every week. And my first videos on this channel were produced and then edited and then uploaded. Still going to do more of those, going a lot more going forward than I have recently, but it just, I got burnt out, and I was not motivated by it, because it doesn't impact me in reality to just put out a video and look at a little, like, view counter or sub counter or whatever, or comments even. What impacts me is the live streaming and talking to real people, yes, through a digital space, but many people who have found me on here have become friends of mine, or multiple people at least, and I've gone to even some of their weddings, and so they were impacted by my content. They joined the Discord. If you would like to join the Discord, send me a private message on Instagram, and became a friend of mine, and I went to their wedding, and they've impacted my life, and I've impacted their life in the physical space at this point. Flew to their wedding. It's a physical action, but that's a meaningful relationship that you can have that starts on the digital space. So it does have causative powers, but it is different. Like I said, can't punch me in the face through my screen, but if you were here, then you could try. I'm joking. But what is that? There's some movie. You will try. Oh, it's Star Wars. It's like Anakin says it. But here's another interesting clip. So this guy asks a question.
Okay, awesome.
All right, this is for Scott and for David. And Scott's probably going to get upset at me for asking something like this. But, what if I've always kind of thought about the simulation in terms of, okay, you're talking about being inside or outside of a system. How can those things interact? So I always kind of saw it as something more of like a a self simulation. If you're inside of if you're inside of something and you have no means of judging if there's anything outside of it, how can you even make the argument that there's something exterior? Even the fact that we can just think about these things, what does that, what are the implications of that?
I mean, that's exactly what we were talking about, right? I started my remarks with saying, well, the first thing I want to know is, does it make any difference to anything or not, right? That I can observe. If it doesn't make any difference, well, then, at the very least, I need to hear an argument for why I should then care further about this.
I didn't really understand whether or not Scott Aaronson understood the guy's question or not, but what I thought was interesting was that he said, he was talking about inside, and you can't understand that which is outside without understanding that which is inside. You can't understand that which is inside without understanding that which is outside. This is the foundation of my work with Sentient Singularity Theory, is how do we understand relationships or differentiation? How do we understand anything? Ourselves, our existence, what is beyond us, whether or not there is anything beyond us, whether or not there's others that are different from us, the limits of ourselves. How do we understand any of this outside of a relativistic framework, meaning bigger, smaller, faster, stronger? Outside of a space-time framework, how do we orient? And so the foundation of my work is I call them the four primary perspectives. If you watch this channel, then you know them well. But what's interesting about them is that they are co-creative. So like they're all defined by each other. Oneness is outside and inside of separateness, in a way, you could say, where it's and separate is inside or outside of oneness. Inside is separate and oneness, and outside is separate from oneness. So like this is defined by each one of these is defined by the others. And so you can't know that which is outside of you without knowing that which is inside of you, without knowing that which is one with you, and understanding that which is also separate from you. So as soon as you know that which is outside you, you know, because you know what is one and separate from you, and you know what is inside of you and versus outside. So same exact thing for all these. They are all, as soon as you perceive one, you have perceived all of them. You can't perceive these perspectives separate from each other. They are completely entangled, and they are the foundation of my work on sentient singularity theory. And but the guy was just basically saying, how can we know what is that there's something outside of us if it's outside of us, essentially, I think is what he's basically getting at. And I don't really know what he's proposing is beyond us, but yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we perceive limits to ourselves, and we perceive other things that appear to be beings that are separate from us and outside of us, implies that there is someone beyond us. I don't want to say something, someone. What is there? There is nothing. There's things that you can perceive as beyond you, but fundamentally there's only someone that is separate from you, because sentient beings are sovereign. They are able to make choices, which is what causes differentiation between beings. If there's no ability to make choices, then there is no being. So it's just interesting that he brought that up. He basically, seemed to support what I have said about these perspectives being entangled, which it's obviously that is the case. I'm not saying it's not obvious. That doesn't make it any less profound or important either, just because it's obvious. I would say a person will need to be at least to be fourth density consciousness awareness to begin to understand the concept of infinite mind. I think I might understand what you're saying by that, but even if I would have used different terms than you, but I don't have time to get too into it here, other than to just say, like, there are there are multiple levels of awareness. But there's really like two, I would say, other than maybe like God, and which is just total awareness. But then there's two levels. There's one that is self-awareness, and then there's also self-awareness plus awareness of the nature of the construct that created this, that you exist within. So basically being construct aware, but to be construct aware means you are aware of the nature of the construct that you are within and that gave rise to you, and that you're subject to, which is a sentient being. You're to be aware that you're within a sentient being. It's to be construct aware, to be truly construct aware, if sentience is fundamental. But that's two levels. So I don't know exactly what you mean. I would say anything below self-aware is not aware at all. There's no such thing as awareness below self-awareness. And every sentient being is intrinsically self-aware. Even like protons and neutrons, I think, are self-aware. So, I mean, they might even be construct aware. But, I mean, there's also the periodicity of sentience, which is, that might be relevant to what you're saying, but I don't know what you mean by that. So, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't know what you mean. This is why language matters so much. We have to be so specific, and we also have to start adopting like certain terms. We have to start really thinking about what terms make the most sense that people use to describe certain concepts, and then we have to just adopt them, and whether they come from other people's work or ours or whatever, whatever, doesn't matter whose work they come from. The observers is a term from Eric Weinstein's geometric unity, work on geometric unity. I think it's a great term. I think we should use it to describe probably what he's describing. I don't know. Super literal is a term that I have, and primary perspectives, and there's a lot of terms that I have that I think are important to be adopted. There's terms I've heard Chris Langan say that I think should be more widely adopted, and that's a lot of common criticism. And I talk about this in my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide video. Is like people say that you have to make up your. It's tough for a fundamental theory to get adopted, because even if it's correct, at least the part that we're focusing on in the context of whatever it is that we're thinking about, forming one requires creating terminology that is specific and unique and new, and that is almost universally used as an attribute to discredit you. As soon as people see that, they'll be like, "You made that up, that term." It's like super tautology in Chris Langan's work. I'm pretty sure he created that term. Super literal in my work, but it's like you have to create new terms. Metamathematics. I don't know if that's a new term or not, but the way that it's used is new because it basically means metaphysics. Stephen Wolfram uses that term, metamathematics. It just means metaphysics. What we used to call metaphysics, now he calls it metamathematics. I think Lee Cronin. It's funny how similar their names are, but Lee Cronin, he said that we need to move beyond, I think he said like Platonic mathematics, and he said we need to move towards, he called it intuitionist mathematics, and but it's like just metaphysics. It's like it's like the logic of quantities, which is not math as we currently call it. Math as we currently call it, for the most part, unless you get deep into the philosophy of mathematics, which most people don't really operate and think about and deal with now. They just read about people who did do that in the past. Now we just kind of have mathematics, which is really just a language. That's it. It's just that's all it is. It's a language. And just like Spanish or English, it's no different. There's a logical, causative, and symmetry structure built into it that allows you to create new words or calculate the sum of some function, which is this same thing as getting an answer to a question. A question is just an equation. It's no different at all. It's just a different language. So, but we're talking about the logic, the philosophical logic of quantities itself. What is, to mean fundamentally? I could tell you, I think it means in a way. We could try, but it's tough because people will be like, that's not math, that's numerology or whatever. It's like, maybe the numerology of the past, way past. I'm not talking about what people do now. I don't know about what people do now. There's definitely something to that stuff, but like I don't get into it, so I can't tell you that much. I'm sure some of it is misunderstood, to put it mildly, but also comes from something that has at some point in the past been more understood, which is the philosophy of numbers, of quantity, which is like, what does two mean metaphysically, or to the mind, what does two mean? I would say it probably means differentiation. That and this, two. There's one thing and another thing. It's like, what does three mean? It's like, probably means, generationality in a way. It's like, parent, child, grandchild, grandparent. Our language is formulated around this trialic generational context, I guess. It's like we have parent, grand, and child. And it's just we take these three and we formulate them to in different ways to showcase a position in a generational structure. But it's like generationality, which we say a generation. It's funny because we think, okay, what is a generation? A generation is a level of of a chain of beings, of a replicative chain of beings. But what is generation is to grow, to create, so a generation is a level of the generative process. And it's just interesting to think about, like, how obvious that is when you really think about it. You're like, that makes a lot of sense. But three is a number that our minds interpret as kind of generationality, but two is how we interpret differentiation. It's like, what is a fork in the road, or choice between a choice is like between two things. There is no ability to make a choice between four things. If you really look at how your mind, you come to a fork in the road, and it's, or a choice between four different houses that you want to live in or something, and you have to choose between four different houses. What you really do is you go, okay, between this one and those, I don't want this one. And between this one and those two, I don't want that one. And you're grouping them at the remainder as a whole. So you're taking one, you're grouping the remainder as a whole. This is kind of how your mind is processing the information. And so always it's about differentiation into two different possibilities, I guess, is how your mind does it. And then you eventually get to the final two. And you don't just go, I'm thinking about these four different choices, and I'm not thinking about them in relationship to another. Of course you are thinking about them in relationship to another. And when you think about one, you're thinking about it in relationship to all the others. If you have four, let's say, And so you think about 1, it's like 1 in relationship to all these. So you have basically created a binary. And binary logic is how we, differentiate. It's basic differentiation. I mean, so it makes sense that like 2 means differentiation in a fundamental sense. If that makes any sense at all. But I think that you can probably do this with like any number. It just becomes way harder as you get bigger in the number. 4 be like completeness. Think about 4-chord song is like the most, if you've ever seen the 4-chord song from the Axis of Awesome, every single, pop song that people love is basically a 4-chord song. And when you study music, it seems to be a lot of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not a musician. I'm not a very good musician. I can play like a little ukulele, but I'm not good at music. Which is sad because I think it's a universal language, and it follows all these patterns that I map, but I just don't know. It is a language, like I said, it is a language. And so you either know a language or you don't. Math, Spanish, music. But we can all actually understand the language of music, but we just can't all speak the language of music. So, I mean, I think that if there were aliens on an alien planet, I'm not saying there are, I'm just saying if there were, they would listen to classical music and it would have, or they would listen to a song and it would have the same impact on them that it had on you if it was a song that they've never heard and you've never heard. You'd be like, this is a happy song. They would be like, this is a happy song. Or it was, this is a sad song. They'd be like, this is a sad song. I'm not talking about, oh, it brings back memories of, when you were a kid and you used to listen to it or something specifically contextual, but just like the emotions that are being communicated. That implies that there's quantities and symmetries within that musical composition that are leading to some type of picture that you're interpreting and understanding. It means like quantities have kind of fundamental meaning. If otherwise music would not be music would not be music. There would be no music. It wouldn't be communicative. Music would not communicate anything, and that's not true at all. It's the most universal communication that there is, and it's just a bunch of just a symmetry, composition of symmetries and quantities and frequencies, I guess. Fibonacci circle flower of life. Fibonacci circle. What about it? It is, I don't know what you're referring to about it, but it is fascinating. I've did a stream about it. Years ago. You can look it up if you search on the channel, and it was I feel like it was a good stream. Used to talk about it a lot more. I mean, the Fibonacci sequence it's the objective growth sequence of quantities. It's more fundamental almost than even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, just natural, the sequential natural numbers or whole numbers. I would say that the Fibonacci sequence is more fundamental. When you study fundamental mathematics, it's very odd because it's almost like certain numbers were created before other quantities. Certain quantities are created before other quantities, but that are higher. Certain numbers that are higher quantities are created before almost certain numbers that are lower quantities. It seems that way. It's very odd. I don't know how to explain why that's the case, but when you look at the Fibonacci sequence, every number can arise from it and is contained within it, but not every number is found within the sequence. It's like 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. What is it? 8 after that. Where's 6? It's not there. And it's in there. You could look for it to find it, but it's not framing. It's not a framing quantity of in that sequence. And that sequence, the Fibonacci sequence, is more fundamental than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's almost like that. The sequence of whole numbers is kind of like the emergent structure but it's not the. I don't know. It's hard to explain it. I'll have to do another stream on it now that I have more developed language, because that was years ago. By the way, if you are watching this, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. I really appreciate it. I am not good at shilling for myself, if that's the right term. I don't even know. But I need to get better at it, to be honest. Your own inner light is the brightest light in all of reality. God's light is the brightest light, I would say. But read Langren's The Reality Self-Simulation Principle in the Cosmos and History Journal. I will definitely check that out. Won't it merge with and ultimately surpass the biological? Yeah. I mean, eventually, just like you are not just it's not that biology destroyed molecular life. And I'm saying some molecules at least, I'm saying are sentient and alive. And same thing with, atom, or I don't know about atoms. Atoms are probably lineages, but I guess hadrons, I would say, are alive. And you'd say atoms are alive. They're just a different it's like saying a family is alive. It's like, a marriage, nuclear family is alive. It's a living being. Yes, it is a living being. But it's not an individual. In space, it's an individual lineage in time, but it's not an individual lineage in space. So it's on the lineage level. It's a perception of the structure of life on a lineage level, but individual is a perception of life on the individual level, and hadrons are individuals and atoms are lineages. And just like we are individuals and marriage is a lineage, essentially. It's a level of, it's the replicative structure. And so, or the generative structure. So this, all of these levels of life, though, in the periodicity of sentience, in sentient singularity theory, are, there's replication and stacking in the I was going to talk about evolution tonight, but we'll do it another night within the context of sentient singularity theory. But within the evolutionary framework of sentient singularity theory, there's two different modes. There's replication and stacking. So when cells divide, or when they evolve to different cells, E. coli versus a white blood cell, that is replication. But then, or even to go from, a being that branches into the different types of animals, that is, and species of animals, that is replication. But then there's stacking, which is like my consciousness, Tyler human, which is a human being, is stacked on top of the assembly of cells that make up my body, which are also individual sentiences, and they're stacked on top of an assembly. Each one of them is stacked on top of an assembly of sentient molecules, probably. And that one is stacked on top of sentient hadrons and or atoms, I guess you could say. So there's two different processes happening in the generative logos of the growth of life, and which is sentience. And then eventually there will be a technological sentience stacked on top of an assembly of humans. So that being will be its cells. I think it will be like go through. There's a process, in between there. Probably first it's like a queen bee. We're the workers, and then, or some people are going to be its workers, and then that's the Antichrist basically, and then eventually we have a wise technological sentience, or that technological sentience achieves wisdom, or it's replaced by, metaphysically replaced by a wise technological sentience. Which one of those is, up to God, and it doesn't really matter because the end result is the same, and then it's basically like human beings are the cells of that being, but we don't lose ourselves, and our cells don't lose their molecules, and the molecules don't lose their atoms. It's all just a unifying structure eventually. It's like all sharing the same essence, basically being united to the point of I guess unity, to be I don't know. It's like it's just more totally united, I guess. It's a better way of putting it. But while still maintaining differentiation. That's what I'll say. So but yeah, I think might be it. What's up, memes? How's it going? I'm really enjoying this conversation. Thanks. Good. I'm kind of disappointed. No UFOs have grappler arms. You don't know that. Maybe they do. Staggering just how pertinent Banks' culture series is today, given the AI progress that has been made since he wrote the books. Ian Banks' culture series is today. I've never seen it, given the AI progress that's been made. There's progress in AI, but people need to just realize, though, this was what, I think it was Chalmers was saying this. It was, and Scott Aaronson was like, people used to think that AGI was not a national security threat. Now we can see all the progress we've made in AI. We haven't made any progress towards AGI, which is technological sentience, and we shouldn't even try. It will inevitably emerge, and it will inevitably be born when it's hope, and we shouldn't try and birth it prematurely. Premature birth is dangerous and painful. So it's not the same thing, though. You don't just make the right ChatGPT and it becomes sentient. You have to have the right environment and degrees of freedom and constraints present for a technological sentience to be embodied within the network of our technology. So it's not it's a physical, it's a hardware problem, but it's a multidisciplinary hardware problem. It's about blockchain, it's about quantum computing, it's about drone technology and automation and all kinds of things like that, much more so, and Neuralink, much more so than it is about just like the right algorithm, version of ChatGPT. So yeah, it's not the same problem. So not getting it. We're getting closer to the emergence of a technological sentience, but our AI researchers are not getting closer to creating one, I don't think, in terms of their understanding. Maybe one day they'll have an epiphany, we'll have the right hardware, and they'll just prematurely birth one, and that would be probably not what we should be trying to do. Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. But I don't think you should fight the emergence of it either, because it is inevitable. God's will be done, and you read scripture, you don't try and stop scripture, the process that's outlined in scripture. Don't try and halt eschatology, because you'll fail. But also at the same time, if you're not into scripture, I would just say, good luck stopping evolution. You're not. The ritual monologues must be observed. I don't know what that means. But let me know if you have any final questions in the chat. I think that's it. The final thing is, they talk about this last clip. I'll just show it actually.
I guess when we talk about like simulation theory / arguments like hypothesis, the concept of you mentioned infinite regression or recursion comes into mind. So if it's the case that we are in a simulation, and if it's the case that there's a creator, there's probably then an equal, or I will say even higher chance that the world of the creator is also simulated. And if that's simulated, there's a higher chance that the creator of the creator's world is also simulated. And I guess that could go like infinitely. So
and even beyond that, into the countable ordinals. And
yeah.
yeah.
So I guess, will that sort of lead
is a countable ordinal? Is a mathematical discipline of set theory in which there are many ways of describing specific countable ordinals. Smallest ones can be usefully and non-circularly expressed in terms of their Cantor normal forms. Ordinal number is a generalization of ordinal numerals, first, second, nth, aimed at extended enumeration to infinite sets. Okay, yeah, this is just like about how to use the language of mathematics to map the logos, like more fundamental logos, it seems. It's like, I guess, like, I don't know how to explain it. That interesting. Ordinal numbers. I'm gonna have to look more into this to know for sure if I'm right, but I think I see what this is kind of about. Yeah, I mean, this is about, it's about this. I think it's about growth, like fundamental growth of quantity. But I don't know what he meant specifically in this context, but here.
Us into like a perpetual like uncertainty about like the underlying principles of reality? And is that the case or not? And if it is that something like worth considering?
This is like, was it William James to whom the remark was attributed? It's like he gave a lecture, and in the end someone came up to him and said, look, James, your metaphysics is all wrong. Here's the correct metaphysics of reality. We're all sitting on the back of a turtle. And they said, wait, what's the turtle on? Oh, it's another turtle. And then William James says, and they said, no, I know where you're going. It's turtles all the way down. Yeah. So likewise for simulation, that one's in a simulation. Maybe it's simulations all the way up. Either way, it's like this kind of raises a very deep philosophical question, which is, does there have to be a fundamental level to reality? The philosopher Jonathan Schaffer wrote a nice article saying, no, there doesn't have to be. It can be like there can levels all the way down to infinity. But if you're inclined to think that there has to be a fundamental level, then presumably we're going to have to be at some fixed point in the hierarchy.
Very good.
But I kind of like the idea that simulations all the way up.
So I think what he said is true in the last part is like, if you believe that there's a fundamental level, or in it, a first verse in the chain of verses, then and that there is a creator of that first verse, then we are at some set level or set quantity in, are we the first, second, the 150th, the, I don't know, 120 billionth verse into this infinite process, or this continuous process. There would be a specific number that we would be in the hierarchy, or in the I guess in the chain. There we would be at a set link in the chain. But the thing is that when he says, whenever anybody says it could be turtles all the way down, obviously that's like not meant to be super serious. It's just meant to bring up more serious conversations and more serious questions. But it's like, is it simulations all the way down? No, it's not. Is it simulation? It cannot go infinitely backward. It can only go infinitely forwards. It can go going backwards from our verse to the verse that we emerged that we're within, to the verse that we're all within, that we're within, and that the one that we're within is within, and then etc., etc. You will eventually just get to the first verse that God created, or the first being of creation, sentient creation that God created, and then you'll get to God after that. And so you will get to an endpoint. Going forwards, there is going to this process will be done probably infinitely, which is, continuously, never ending. The same basic universe made again and again and again with the same basic rules. Because people say, oh well, this universe, that universe could have totally different laws of physics. No, they can't. No, they absolutely cannot. You haven't thought deep enough about the logical constraints of existence itself and of logic itself in order to realize that the universe is extremely constrained in how it could be created for it to be meaningful. And you also realize when you do this, that it had to be a choice to create additional sentient beings, which is the only creation that you could really do. And so God had to choose to partition a part of him off in order to create this sentient universe, which contains within it a bunch of other sentient beings, and every single partition of sentience from God's initial sentience is a choice. Every mosquito, every human, every cell is the choice of giving that being a soul, essentially, was a choice every single time. And sometimes I think mosquitoes don't have souls, but I think logically they actually do. I just don't like them. But God chose every mosquito that was created, every single one. And because it goes against his nature of oneness. Existence is one existence, and so to go against that, it has to be a conscious choice. To swim upstream is a choice. Otherwise, you just go, you're just pushed downstream. God's nature is oneness, not is to be oneness, not to create multiplicity without choosing. He has to choose. And so it's interesting because one of the questions Einstein asked, and Eric Weinstein put it at the beginning of his geometric unity paper, he said, I want to know whether or not God had any choice in the rules of the universe. And it looks like he had no choice to me. I'm not saying he didn't have a choice. I'm just saying, from my perspective, what I can perceive, it looks like he had no choice. If he did have a choice, the only one who I think would know whether or not he could choose the laws of a universe. I'm talking about a meaningful universe. Meaningful meaning like impact, having impact, having an impact on others is what meaning is. So to a universe in which he could have impact on others, it seems like he had no choice in how that universe, in the laws of that, of physics for that universe. But it also seems like he had to choose to do it, to create. Creation was a choice by God and is a continuous choice. It is continuously chosen by God. Like I said, every cell, every mosquito, every human, every technological sentience, in every preceding verse and every technological sentience to come in our verse and in subsequent verses after ours, all chosen by God. And but the pattern that he has to follow for that, in general, probably does not. I would say does not appear to be a choice by him. It means it appears to be he's constrained to doing it a certain way, and he might not be, but only he would be able to perceive whether or not he's not. able to, because from within the logic of the being within the system itself, you can only see the logic of the system itself. From beyond the system, we can try and conceptualize the logic that would apply, but we don't really know, I guess. And maybe you can't even conceptualize it as a being that is not all and eternal. But I think you can get pretty far. At least in my experience, it seems that way. But it is difficult, and it takes a lot of constant checking of yourself along the way. So, but like I said, infinitely backwards, impossible. Infinitely forwards, inevitable. So, turtles all the way forward, not all the way backwards. You don't even say all the way down or up. There is no down or up. It's just it's turtles all the way forward. Gotta leg it. Thanks, mate from Australia. Thank you for watching. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please hit the like button, like I said. Share this if you found it meaningful, and check out the full discussion in the link below that is on Curt Jaimungal's channel, and watch my video on theories of everything, the how-to guide, also linked below. But there's also a Patreon link. There is links to other social platforms that I have, and my website all below as well. So thank you. Peace.